O'Connor, yeah, which is the best sort of portrait of a boss, a big city boss. It's based on Honey Fitz, the John Kennedy's grandfather, who was mayor of Boston. Because you'll get honest renditions of the kind of conversations that go on between politicians. Because if you knew the way politicians talked among themselves, you'd be discouraged, but you'd also be scandalized and angered about the way they talk about voters, about average people. As a reporter, I can verify that a lot of these conversations are real because I've done a lot of political reporting over 25, 30 years. But the novelists really get to it more, in some ways, more incisively, more accurately than the journalists. So I want to open it up to a conversation if you want to, because we have, what, about a half an hour, and anybody can ask me anything they want.
Oh, sorry, he was supposed to.
I might also add playwrights. Gore Vidal's best man.
Oh, sure, yeah, no, and Gore Vidal's. Although I think Gore Vidal gets some things wrong about the relationship between politicians. Can I cut to this? Do you mind if I? There's a great scene in, I think it's. What's the scene where he has I forget which novel it is, but he has a conversation between Teddy Roosevelt. He imagines a conversation between Teddy Roosevelt and William Randolph Hearst. And he has Hearst dressing Roosevelt down, saying, "You pipsqueak, you little nothing, don't you realize we're the ones who run the country, we're the money, we're the power," and so on and so forth. This is false. Politicians have the power in this country, and the typical conversation is the other way around. It's the politician dressing down the businessman, saying, "You son of a bitch, you don't support me, you don't contribute to my campaign. Goodbye to your tax loophole. Goodbye to the favors that I was promising you the next time around when the bill that matters to you comes up in committee." And I know this because lobbyists have told me, politicians will never tell you this, almost never. But lobbyists, if you interview enough of them, will tell you, they will describe scenes where it's the politician dressing down the businessman, or the politician dressing down the lobbyist, or the politician, in the case of Chicago, where we're from, or Cook County, dressing down the labor leader, saying, "You little shit, who do you think you are, head of your little labor union? I'm the boss. And if you want to get anything in this, any favors, anything done in this city or in this county, you better toe the line." And I'll talk about that a little bit more if you want. But Vidal is great on a lot of stuff. It's just that on the power and Ned Lamont says this to me in the book. He says, in an interview, he says, the typical relationship between a politician and a businessman is a shakedown. The politician shaking down the businessman, not the businessman bribing the politician. This is another thing that people have a hard time parsing. Go ahead, yeah.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry, yeah.
Take the mic back.
But where does the politician get his power from? Doesn't he get it from the typical understanding is he gets it from money from the lobbyist?
The money is a more recent phenomenon, and the money is now being used very effectively by incumbent congressmen to prevent other people from running. In other words, if you're an incumbent congressman or congresswoman, you have all the power of the incumbency for fundraising. In other words, you can shake down, let's assume that half of you have an interest in a bill getting passed. You're going to get a call. Believe me, all of you will get a call from the staff or from the campaign of the incumbent congressman saying, well, H.R. 673 is coming up into committee. I know you have a lively interest in that bill. And they talk about it. Yes, we'd love to see that passed, Congressman. Oh, yeah, well, okay. And, of course, I'm having a fundraiser next month, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from some of my people, and so on and so forth. That's the way the conversation goes. The challenger cannot do that. They can't call up a businessman and say, "Give me money, and I'll do you a favor," because they're not in a position to do a favor yet. Whereas the incumbent has all the advantages. That's why we have a re-election rate, which I talk about in the book. And this is one of the things that got the Frenchmen interested, was a column I wrote about re-election rates of 98, 99% in the Senate and the House, even in years of supposedly seismic change like '94 when Gingrich and the Republicans took control. I think it was about 88, 89%. The re-election rate is at the highest level also in state legislatures. It's over 90% since World War II. That's because the incumbents have learned how to harness money to keep competitors out. And they're shaking people down partly because of the campaign finance reforms after Watergate. They're shaking people down more systematically and effectively than they ever were before. Now, that being said, in Chicago, and Chicago maybe is the extreme example, or in Cook County, it doesn't matter if you have money. If you haven't demonstrated loyalty to the local Democratic Party in myriad ways, you don't get slated. You don't get to run. And this is another thing that I try to talk about somewhat. I wish I could have done more reporting on it. Barack Obama, when I say he doesn't come from nowhere, he doesn't come from nowhere because he could not be where he is today without the sponsorship of the Cook County political machine, the Daley organization. Now, I want to get to more questions, but there is a little bit of evidence, there is some evidence that Obama did specific favors for Daley, like running against an incumbent congressman who had angered Daley by running against him in the primary, Bobby Rush. You always hear the story that Obama was shocked to be beaten so badly by Bobby Rush in Chicago. And I don't buy that story. I think it's more plausible, I can't prove it, but it's more plausible that and I have some sources to back this up, that Daley encouraged Obama to run against Rush, to punish Rush for his disloyalty, knowing that he would lose. Obama lost, and then he was rewarded with a clear path to running for Senate. And Daley's most trusted advisors, David Axelrod and one other guy whose name escapes me. But that's party loyalty. That's about doing favors to the guy who's been running things for a long time and being rewarded for your loyalty.
So I guess this means we also can't grow up to be Elvis Presley or Michael Jordan or anything. On the surface, you already answered one-third of this question.
Right.
On the surface, Lincoln, Kennedy, and Obama came out of nowhere in the sense they served, 2 terms in state legislature, 1 term in Congress, and boom, they're in the White House. On the surface. Shoot down that argument.
Well, Kennedy doesn't come from nowhere because his grandfather was head of the Boston political machine, Honey Fitz, the aforementioned Honey Fitz. And his father had a lot of money. And he did serve 2 Senate terms, didn't he? JFK? He was elected twice to the Senate. He was a congressman and so on and so forth. So he had political sponsorship in Boston from the beginning, from the regular organization. Obama also. Who was the third person? Lincoln. Lincoln is a more interesting case. And I talk about Lincoln because Lincoln had to found his own party to win, to get in, really. And that's really if you ask me for suggestions on what needs to be done, I have to go back to Lincoln and Jefferson, who were both party founders. Remember, Lincoln had a phenomenally unsuccessful electoral career. He runs for, I think he was in the state legislature, but he gets 1 term in Congress, and historians are divided on why he did it. And I go into it in some detail, his decision to denounce the Mexican War, which was really an invasion. I mean, it was very Iraq-like, although it was a little bit more, it's more complicated than that. But it's a preemptive, provocative war started by the United States, by Polk. Why Lincoln decided to denounce it at the last minute when it's almost over is something that we're not entirely sure of. But he did, and he did it, I'd like to think, at least 75% based on principle. the deal they had cut in Illinois was that, or in the 7th Congressional District, which he represented as a Whig, was that somebody else would get a chance to run after he'd served one term. But he wanted desperately to be asked to run for re-election. As soon as he opposed the Mexican War, and they sort of they hung him out to dry, the Whigs hung him out to dry, he was finished. He couldn't run, not only couldn't run for